different things along the way that can help shape us in the near future. We're going to take a few journeys along the way, looking at some hymn-based experiences, what we might do, also some liturgical experiences and proclamation experiences. And we'll wrap that up with looking at some resources and also some prayers for our journey as organists and fellow conspirators and collaborators on this journey of leading worship during the pandemic. So I thought it might be great to acknowledge an awareness of where we're at by taking a look at Ezekiel 37, verse 11. I have to admit there are days where I feel like my bones are absolutely dry, as Ezekiel said. Our hope has gone and we are done for. Joyce Rupp, in her book, May I Have This Dance, sends the following comments. Tiredness grounds me into a quiet stupor of the spirit. I yearn to be inspired, to be lifted up, set free beyond the place of deadness. We may be in that place, or we may have gone past that now, but I'm guessing from the people I talk to that are in my sphere of influence and in the worship services I attend, that many people are bringing this tiredness and this longing to be inspired, to be lifted up to the times of worship that we are offering. So we're not left, though, in the dust. If we read a little bit more in Ezekiel, thus says God to these bones, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live. And Joyce Rupp continues her commentary with, there I am in Ezekiel's valley, one heap among many, just another stack of old dry bones. Some Mondays feel this way, and Tuesdays too, to say nothing of Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But just when the old heap of bones seems most dry and deserted, a strong breath of life stirs among my dead. Someone named God comes to my fragments and with twinkling eye, may I have this dance? The voice stretches into me, a stirring leaps in my heart, lifting up the bones of death. And I'm hoping that perhaps you are hearing this daily, this quiet voice, still small voice saying, may I have this dance with you, and lifting up your bones in the life that you've been granted to live here and the calling that you have as an organist or church musician. I personally always need to be reminded of where do we start from and what really are we called to do? And it doesn't matter whether we're doing it in person, online, or in some other fashion. For me, I believe that we are called to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. And within that calling, each of us are summoned to a particular task in a particular place at a particular time, knowing that this summons might change through our lifetime and take us in new directions in unexpected ways. I can't emphasize that last phrase enough. Take us in new directions in unexpected ways. We did not plan to be doing this, or at least I didn't plan to be at this place in my career and in my calling as a church musician. I also believe that we are summoned through our calling to inspire, lead, and support and encourage the faith community as it sings its songs. And that seems like an oxymoron right now. How are we going to sing our songs when we can't even meet together and sing in the same place? Perhaps we need to redefine our definition of what it means to sing or how we go about it. In addition, I believe we're summoned to bring the text and music of hymns and liturgy to life in the faith community that we are called to serve. All that so the song of the faith community can be a living voice of the gospel. And I think this is really more important now than ever, as we are living in a world that is so torn and divided and needing to hear reconciliation and unity and justice proclaimed through the gospel. So before we go about our task, I think we must sit in humility before the works of art, including the treasures of communal song, so that we might fully receive them for ourselves, connect with them, and share them with the faith community we are summoned to lead. I believe C.S. Lewis said it best when he said, "The first demand any work makes upon us is to surrender, look, listen, and receive." And sometimes I think we come to what we are called to lead in worship and say, oh, I've done that before. I don't need to spend any time with it. And perhaps just the opposite is true, because when we don't look at it afresh with the eyes of the time in which we are called to leave it, we will miss its relevant message for today. So that whole notion of sitting in humility is, I believe, critical to how we go about our work. These are just things that I have observed from people sharing ideas with me, conversations I've had with different people, and also from watching a variety of worship experiences and services that are offered remotely and online, and even in a few instances in person. It appears to me from conversations and all of the above that I've just shared that people are longing and needing worship that gives a glimpse of the divine in a world that is really torn. They're needing and longing for something that fosters community, encourages relationship, engages the senses, and speaks to life journeys, both individual and corporate during this time. Many people are feeling isolated and losing that sense of connection with others. And I think that is perhaps our biggest challenge as organists and church musicians as we strive to lead worship during this time. Specifically regarding worship, people's attention span, which is affected in a different way in each of the means of which they might worship. If they're meeting in person, many of them prefer something that is shorter so that they can feel more comfortable being in a space outside of their comfort zone. Those who are worshiping online welcome also a briefer time of worship because they're in an observer mode, and it's much harder to connect both relationally and in terms of engaging with what is going on in front of them. And while a unified and thematic design of worship is always our goal, I think it's more important at this time, as I've watched a variety of services and engaged with them online. It's much easier within that time period to stay intact and engaged if a theme is followed throughout. When we start going all over the place, idea-wise, we tend to lose our focus as leaders, and I think we lose the attention and focus of our online worshipers. And finally, while the relationship of music to the word is always integral within worship, I think it is even more so now. And by what I mean by that is that I think sometimes we're going to have to refocus our energies. So particularly if we are facilitating online worship, that we maybe I shouldn't say maybe, I think we should pay more attention to what goes on within the context of worship, in whatever type of liturgy we are engaged in. And we can certainly bookend it with wonderful voluntaries, but it's been my experience that people are more engaged during that time of worship in remote learning than they might necessarily be during a long prelude and a long postlude. As much as I love those things, I'm not advocating that we would get rid of them, but I do think that the more attention we pay within the context of the liturgy, the more we will be able to engage those people who are worshiping either in person and online. And so what does this mean for us? Well, I think we need to think outside of the box in terms of the repertoire that we choose and the way we share that repertoire, how we lead assembly song, whatever that means in our given circumstance. revisiting known assembly song and planting seeds for new assembly song. This may mean getting off the bench to engage the faith community in new understandings of singing, engaging in assembly song, and living the liturgy of worship or of life, as the case may be. If we think all is gloom and doom in this period, maybe this pandemic is calling us to revisit what we are all about, whether it lasts this way for a long time or we go back to what we considered normal worship prior to the pandemic. I think it kind of wakes us up, it stirs us, it makes us uncomfortable, and maybe we all need those times in our life where we are shaken up so that we actually step up to the plate and say, you know, I've been doing this for 10 years. This part is really working, but this other stuff isn't. It's time to revisit it. So I would like to take us through 5 hymn experiences from different hymns of different traditions and maybe different ways to go about them and what it might mean for an online experience or an in-person experience. So we're going to begin with an early English tradition hymn, O God, Our Help in Ages Past. And I think as we're setting about to create any hymn experience to invite people in, I think we need to maybe take a look at the big picture of text. And so our first journey I've called, It's All About Time. And if we look at that text of, O God, Our Help in Ages Past, we find indeed it is all about time. Time governed by the seasons, time governed by clocks, time governed by the sun and the moon. It's all about time also, time in people's life. Young, just at birth, our young people, and then as we grow older together. It's also all about time when we're angry, times when we are sad, sometimes when we are just in disbeliefs, times when we are overjoyed. All of that is part of our journey together. All of that in 6 short stanzas of O God, Our Help in Ages Past. So I think as we are thinking about how do we go about leading congregational song during this pandemic, but really during any time, I think is how are we going to invite people in to both the text and the challenges the text offers, and also the comfort the text offers, the truth the text offers, and also into the music. If I were leading this particular hymn during this time, I would use those visuals of It's All About Time in whatever fashion works for you, if it's for in-person worship or online, to get people to think about, oh, I've never thought about time this way. We've sung those words over and over in our lifetime, and we're not always necessarily reconnecting to them, and perhaps we're going through the motions. I think it's really important when you're sharing in person that you prepare a visual of the hymn text, which allows those people who are in person with you to engage with their eyes and their ears, knowing that many people hear with their eyes more than with their ears. If you're sharing it online, I would make it perhaps a little bit more involved by sharing visuals of the hymn with music present for those stanzas we're inviting the online worshipers to participate in, and text for just those in which we are inviting them to meditate upon or listen to. So my plan for this particular time together this evening is to use 2 resources, Paul Mons's Partita on St. Anne, and then a festive hymn setting of O God, Our Help in Ages Past that I did for a memorial service. And so my plan includes the following. We use the Paul Mons theme for the introduction, and then map out how each stanza will be done. And those accompaniments for those stanzas will be hopefully reflective of the stanzas and themes of the individual text. O God, our help in ages past, very timely during this time of the pandemic. And so if we put that kind of energy into perhaps one of our hymns, not all of them on a given Sunday, we might be putting our organ voluntaries that perhaps maybe came before the service right in the context of worship itself in leading this hymn. Taking a look at another hymn from the Welsh tradition, Immortal, Invisible, God Only Wise. This journey was really about meeting through the text and the music, the God of creation. I've listed some of the attributes and descriptors that we use for God in this particular piece. It might also be another opportunity to meet the colors of the organ. And it might be kind of fun as you are sharing this hymn with your congregation to surround the visuals of the text or the text and music of the hymn with the instrumental pipes that are being used or the instruments themselves that the organ is trying to imitate. I don't think we make a big deal about it in talking about it, but I do think it could be one of those subliminal things that helps people understand, oh yeah, we have a different orchestra from the organ accompanying us and leading us in song now. Everything that we do doesn't have to be as major as what happened in the hymn, O God, Our Help in Ages Past. And sometimes finding simple things that speak to where we are at ability-wise and to the context in which we are offering worship are the best things that we can do. We listen now to one suggested way of doing O God, Our Help in Ages, Immortal, Invisible.
Thank you.
As we look to the seasons that are coming ahead and the festivals, Sundays, one of those celebrated by most traditions right now is a time of Reformation or Reformation Sunday. And we look to a hymn, Lord, keep us steadfast in your word, that actually started out as a chant before it became a hymn or a chorale. And as we take a look at this text, it truly is a prayer text from beginning to end, but that prayer takes on different characteristics in terms of how we feel and might pray the words themselves. If we look at that first stanza, we see some ideas of steadfastness and protection standing out. That second stanza, strength. And the third stanza, peace and unity. With those diverse ideas and requests or petitions in the term of prayer, it would help if we would maybe provide ways in which our congregation could be brought into those ideas of prayer without us saying a word ahead of time. Perhaps letting the cantor sing the first stanza a cappella so that we could get a little bit of a feel for the simplicity of that steadfastness in prayer. And then when we get to that stanza about power and praying for strength, through all of this, maybe the organ would improvise or play an extant composition that reflects that affect or characteristic. And then finally returning to the cantor to sing with a very unobtrusive organ accompaniment that is simply based on each phrase of the hymn and provides a cushion for a rather simple vocal line placed above it. If I were to share this hymn in person or online, I would speak before sharing it, and I would encourage us to do that in a number of instances. Some people believe that breaks up the flow of the liturgy, but during this time, I think it might help the flow of the liturgy by inviting people into what we have planned and maybe helping them to see something that they might miss along the way that had we not called attention to it. So if we take a look at the history of this or the historical context of this hymn, we find out that it was a prayer both for spiritual protection, spiritual health, but it was also a prayer for physical protection from warring factions during the time of the Reformation. We listen to Lord, keep us steadfast.
Song
We also look forward to the time of All Saints, observe that first weekend in November, and we visit an early American tune for that particular occasion, Jerusalem, my happy home, when shall I come to thee? And sometimes we may find that we have an organ voluntary that helps us create our setting for our cantor to sing along with. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Gerald Muir's Suite for Organ, but the second movement that he wrote for Marilyn Mason is based on this hymn tune, Land of Rest. And sometimes it might be nice to hear, since the tune is presented in its original form in his voluntary, to have that cantus firmus both played on the organ and sung by the soloist. So we put together, hello? So we put together two different settings that, after visiting them as part of the planning process, I found out that both Gerald and I used a similar harmonic scheme for our settings without knowing what the other had written. And as we are embarking on our hymn journey, we conclude with a global piece, Enviado soy de Dios, translates as the Lord now sends us forth. We may have to leave the organ bench to go to a piano bench or adapt a piano accompaniment to the organ. But however you choose to do it, I think the most important thing is that we might invite our online worshipers as well as our in-person worshipers, not necessarily to sing with their voices, but to sing with their hands or any sound source instruments they might have at their disposal. And so we might call this experience Move It, and a new way of singing. And for moving it, you might just, as you're inviting people to sing this sending song in the time of worship, teach them some of the rhythmic accompaniments that might be played on a cowbell or on a conga or on a banga. And they might be invited to find something that they think replicates that sound in their own experience. And then once the piece starts, have them move, have them dance. I'll never forget an AGO hymn festival I was leading for regional in the South, where I invited people to come forward to dance during one of the hymns. And sure enough, 2 of the AGO members got up in front and no one else could believe it. And I was overjoyed. What a great example they set for the rest of us. And sometimes your parishioners might be more comfortable dancing in their homes because only their family is going to see them and no one else will get a spectacular view of their original dance. The Lord now sends us forth, or Enviado. Thank you for sharing your spirits in that global peace that comes to us from Central America. Just a word of caution. Would I do all of those things in one worship service? Probably not. But if we're thinking about limiting our time for worship to meet the attention span of our worshipers at this point in our journey together, maybe we only do 1 or 2 hymns and not 3 or 4 during worship, and we do them in a way that might ask more of us as the leaders, but invite them in more wholeheartedly in creative ways to participate. We're going to keep going along our journey, and we're going to move now to some new journeys, liturgical experiences. For online, sing as many settings that your congregation knows, and maybe your cantor can lead them, or a small group, socially distant, can lead them. And by the same token, lead those settings that are not known. And for some of us, they may be the same settings that were on the first list. We have so many opportunities within the hymnal resources that we are given, in addition to the settings that appear in supplements to our own denominational resources. I think it's safer to do settings that are known, with our online worshipers, because sometimes settings that are known, people can't resist singing them, and all of a sudden we'll have them singing in-person worship. You know how your congregation works best and how to help them understand that. Sometimes, though, to teach them settings that are unknown, I chose one that probably is unknown to everybody except maybe for the people at Holy Cross and a couple other Lutheran churches. A summer setting of the liturgy for conga drums and a calypso beat that would be a fun thing to engage, again, the body as the singing voice while a cantor leads the song of the Sanctus. Totally changing the course stylistically, we could take a look at settings for 2-part or unison choir or vocal solos that have been written and are available both in public domain as well as published resources. We'll take now, I've listed some there for you. The Foray, the Messa Bassa, is probably one of the most familiar ones. Some newer ones by Peter Matthews and Peter Robb. A wonderful unison mass, Mass for One Small Angel by McNeill Robinson. And then a mass setting or Eucharist setting by John Rutter. We'll take a look now at one of the masses that's actually written for solo voice by Joseph Reinberger, Missa Puerorum. And we'll take a look at the Agnus Dei. And sometimes it's wonderful to do these for in-person worship, particularly in high liturgical situations, because it doesn't encourage people to sing along, but it does keep us in the flow of the liturgy and the action of the liturgy. our cantor is going to share part of the liturgy in another language, and in this case, Latin, make sure that the text is translated for both your online and in-person worshipers. I think sometimes it's a great opportunity for us to get off the bench and perhaps just steal a bit of a hymn that's very familiar to people. And in this case, Now Thank We All Our God, and make it a prayer response during a litany in which people might use their bodies and their voices, particularly when they are not in person worshiping. Certainly using their bodies while they're in-person worshiping. It might be as simple as this, and I'm not sure that you can see me, but you might simply start with crossing your hands over your heart for the first phrase, Now Thank We All Our God, with hearts, opening up your heart to hands open in front of you for hands, and then voices lifting up to our lips. Another litany that you could do would involve the organ, and it might be the simply accompanying petitions that are offered and then leading in the congregation to a corporate sung response remotely.
With longing and hopeful expectation, let us pray for the church, the world, and all those in need. God of hope, your message calls us to let go of our fears and place our trust in you. Sustain us in your hope as we await your coming. For the world, we pray.
Another liturgical experience would be offering music during the distribution of communion. For some of us, that means every week. For others of us, it maybe means once a month, and for others, it might mean once a quarter. Whatever your tradition is, if you are worshiping in person in particular, but also online, it might be a great time for you to share organ repertoire that is not necessarily based on a tune people would want to hum along with you at communion time, but might provide the music that accompanies the action of sharing the elements. A couple excerpts of examples. I can't show you an excerpt of this score due to copyright, but we listened to just a little bit of the improvisation, which is an elevation from the Suite Medieval by Langlais. prohibits us from listening to all of these, but I'll just show you a few excerpts visually of the different elevations that were shared on that previous list. The first one by Bellman is probably the easiest one of the group. A second elevation is from the hand of a Belgian composer, but in the French tradition, and it's entitled Rex Splendens, or The Splendor and Glory of the King. And I will have us listen to this one. Each of his elevations from his set of 24 are in two parts, because as he says in his preface to the work, well, I just didn't know how long it was going to take the priest to take care of the action of elevating the elements for consecration during the Eucharist. So at some point, he puts a cadence in the middle of the piece, and it's almost like he's merged two pieces together. This elevation is an example of that. We listen to it now. Rex Splendens. While not a composer from the top 10 from Belgium or France, I think the music is deserving of our attention and very useful in the course of our liturgies. Probably the most well-known elevations are the ones that follow now. This elevation from Messa Bassa by Louis Vierne, and this communion from the same. And just to refresh our memories.
Vierne Communion, take 2.
And a third piece by Vierne, Communion, Opus 8, probably the most adventuresome harmonically of the group we're looking at for today. Just a reminder, as we are playing music during the time of communion or the Eucharist in our parishes, it doesn't always have to be soft or sublime. Sometimes it's on a festive Sunday, it's wonderful to be jubilant, like the Belgian piece that we heard earlier, Rex Splendens. Moving along rather quickly, to take a look at what might we do in terms of seasonal rituals as an organist. Well, I think getting off the bench again would be really important. And perhaps as we're considering what we might teach our congregations this year for Advent or an Advent candle lighting song, we might do something that will perk up both their eyes and their ears. I have the privilege of working with, on a regular basis, a festival chorus in Singapore. And on one of my visits there during the season of November and December, we were preparing an Advent Christmas concert for the country. And I was privileged to visit people in their homes at that time. And they had Christmas trees suspended from their ceilings. And I thought, oh, I wonder what the liturgical significance of those trees hanging upside down might be. Well, come to find out that it was really a very practical matter. Their homes are rather small, and so that they wouldn't lose space in their meeting room, they put the tree suspended from the ceiling because it took up less space. But nevertheless, I was intrigued by those upside down Christmas trees. And I had known about a carol called Carol We an Upside Down Christmas, with a text by a New Zealand composer. And it was really a Christmas carol text that talks about cultural differences, because in New Zealand, Christmas happens in the middle of what we would call summer here in the United States. But taking that idea, I wrote a text that talked about the whole notion of an upside down season, and combined it with the scripture readings for each Sunday in Advent. And the whole point of it being that, you know, we remember that first Christmas, the world was indeed turned upside down by the things that happened. People's lives were changed, interrupted, perhaps like ours are today. Perhaps you might find a way to symbolize that in your church. When we did it in the parish I was serving at the time, in the narthex, we hung our Christmas tree from the ceiling. And for the 4 weeks of Advent, it stayed that way. And on Christmas Eve, all of a sudden, it appeared right side up, symbolizing all was right with the world, with the God incarnate coming to our place and time. We listened to an excerpt of this carol, which would be a fun one to encourage your parishioners to dance to, either with their feet or just simply their shoulders. When we watch people in concert settings, we see shoulders move without anybody telling those shoulders to move. Often, when a minuet or a waltz is being played by an orchestra, we see those shoulders swaying from side to side. The same thing could be true for this particular carol. Be a great idea to have one of your children be the cantor for that, and to lead your online and in-person worshipers in that carol. Moving ahead quickly to one more experience, a journey with what we might call proclamation, for lack of a better word. Sometimes we like to include solos in our worship, and certainly during the time of the pandemic, a solo song and offerings of solo song are quite important because we're not able to have our full choirs be present necessarily to do that. We're learning how to do it with virtual choir experiences, but when we can't do that, perhaps a solo singer or a pair of duet singers is our best solution. Perhaps a piece that we might use with a soloist during Advent 2 or for Advent or Christmas Eve lessons and carols would be The Lamb with poetry by William Blake, a setting of it for solo voice by Michael Burkhardt, or if we had a small ensemble, the wonderful setting of The Lamb by John Tavner, where you could space your 4 singers out around the room to sing this palindrome. We listen to the solo version. And just a thought, when you're offering any solo that fits the text being offered and proclaimed through the spoken word, don't necessarily have to put it in the anthem slot, but maybe put it right next to where that spoken word text has occurred so people can more easily make the connection and respond musically to what has been proclaimed with the spoken word. I've created another little repertoire list for you, as I did earlier in this PowerPoint. What I will do, it's silly for us to write down all of these things. So I will send to our AGO board a repertoire and resource list of all of the things shared in tonight's PowerPoint presentation that can be downloaded as a reference for the future. And this brings us to our postlude. In our closest is going to just consist of a few resources and just make a few comments on those resources regarding our calling in life. A wonderful book by Parker Palmer, Let Your Life Speak. Anything in my book that Parker Palmer writes is worth our time to read. He is an educator right now in his 80s and still sharing his wisdom and insights with us. A wonderful book on ritual, which might challenge us to no end, is Robert Fulghum's From Beginning to End. You might remember him as the author, Everything I Needed to Learn, I Learned in Kindergarten. Same author. And this particular book delves into the whole notion of rituals and how they are important in all aspects of our life, and even things we don't think about ritual are ritual, but how sometimes we need to rethink those rituals, not abandon them, but perhaps change the elements of those rituals. For some of us, it will be a fun journey into exploring something outside our comfort zone. For others of us, we might stop reading after the first couple pages and say, oh, this is too far out for me. I hope you will take the opportunity to read it and challenge yourself, because it might provide some insights that we can use during this time of the pandemic. And then a couple of music resources. The Lutheran Church has a, well, not new anymore, but had a new hymnal called Evangelical Lutheran Worship, and they published attendant resources to it, and one called The Musician's Guide. It's worth purchasing this resource just for the first section of the book, which are essays on styles and practices, and talks about different traditions of music and provides context for them. Another thing specifically for organists, Creative Hymn Playing, which can prove perhaps as a guidebook for organists and provides an overview of hymn leadership in the context of worship. And then finally, As Though the Whole Creation Cried, an attempt to offer another of T. Tertius Noble 50 hymn harmonizations for organists to use during worship, based on text and also on the period and styles from which the hymns come. Perhaps it would be important for us as musicians to consider this prayer for our journey by Ken Geyer, found in Windows of the Soul. Help me, O God, to have the humility to sit at the feet of great art, whether it is a painting or a person on a street, a scene from a movie, that should say, or a score from musical, a sunset or a psalm, and to look and to listen and to receive what is being offered there. We come back to C.S. Lewis' admonition to us at the beginning of our time together this evening. And perhaps even in the midst of this pandemic, when we were hoping to be further along, we need to remember that not everyone is in the same place. And so I share this prayer for you, which came out at the beginning of the time of the pandemic, and that has, I think, endured both the time that has gone on since then and is as important today as it was then. May we who are merely inconvenienced remember those whose lives are at stake. May we who have no risk factors remember those who are most vulnerable. May we who have the luxury of working from home remember those who must choose between preserving their health or making their rent payments. May we who have the flexibility to care for our children when schools close remember those who have no options. May we who have to cancel our trips remember those who have no safe place to go. May we who are losing our margin money in the tumult of the economic market remember those who have no money at all. May we who settle in for a quarantine at home remember those who have no home. As fear grips our country, let us choose love. During this time when we cannot physically wrap our arms around each other, let us find ways to be the loving embrace of God to our neighbors. And perhaps we as organists church musicians, cantors, choir directors, ministers of music, can be the loving embrace of God with the music that we share in our online and remote and in-person times of worship. I know this is lots that we've looked at, and I would love to hear any sharing that you have or things that you felt worked really well. I think some of the things that I shared tonight would be no different than things I would do if I were in in-person worship all the time. But I have to plan more carefully, and I have to consider ways in which I can be more inclusive via the parameters given to us by the pandemic. Questions or thoughts that you would like to share?
Anyone?
Well, I guess I'd like to
Sorry,
say,
I got a late start. I forgot about tuning in until very late. Is there a collection of materials that are available for us latecomers to access?
I believe that this session has been recorded and will be posted. Is that correct, Joseph and David?
Yep.
And I will make available also a hard copy that could be downloaded from our AGO chapter website of the resources shared during our time together this evening.
Thank you so much.
Well, I say thank you for letting me share something that's very dear to my heart. I hope it spurs creativity using the resources that you have and encourages you to get off that organ bench and maybe look at things from a different vantage point and from a place not in the pew, but in front of a screen as is needed. Blessings on all of your work, and thank you for letting me share tonight.
Thank you very much, Michael. It was all very informative. Thank you.
Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.